welcome to the webinar on climate risks and long-term resilience, organized by Capgemini and SWIP, two partners of French origin, whose partnership extends to the Nordics, where we have been working together since 2022. The topic for today is climate risk and long-term resilience. Our hosts are Thomas Benestad from Capgemini Norway. Thomas has been working for the last 5 years driving data-driven sustainability transformations in energy and manufacturing sectors mainly. We have Julien de Normandie from SWIP. Julien is no less than a former Minister of the French Republic and is Chief Impact Officer at SWIP. And myself, Jeremy, Sustainability Lead at Capgemini Invent in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. We are together for 30 minutes. You participants are on mute, but you have the possibility to ask questions anonymously with the Q&A button. Don't be shy. What do we have at the agenda for those 30 minutes? Thomas and I will define what climate risks are and what their impacts are for our corporations. And then in the digital era, even more with the rapid progress of AI, data and technology must be leveraged. Julien will share insights on how that can be done and how the SWIP system can help your companies mitigate climate risks. We will have 10 minutes at the end to take your questions.
Cool, take it away to the next. Hi everyone, nice to see you in my little cabin here in the virtual Christmas spirit. But for those that you don't know Capgemini, just briefly, we're a large consulting company working globally with a strong presence in the Nordics, around 400,000 globally and 7,000 odd consultants in the Nordics. Working a lot within deep tech, but of course also sustainability. We're super committed to this as a company ourselves, but we know that we make the most impact through the clients and the partners we have, such as SWIP today. And I'm going to shed a little bit of light on what we kind of mean about this topic, climate risk and resilience, and how we contextualize this in the overall picture. Climate risk isn't really kind of a new thing, but I think it's good to have a brief common understanding of what we're actually talking about. When we talk about climate risk, we usually think about two perspectives. We talk about the physical risks of climate change and how this impacts your business. So heat waves, extreme weather, flooding, etc. And then you have the actual transition risks of the world moving towards a greener future, a more sustainable future, which also has an impact on your business. And we're not talking about the impact that you have necessarily on the world. When we're talking about climate risks, we are talking about how the world impacts you. So this is taking more of the outside in perspective instead of what a lot of companies, rightfully so, are also working on, which is climate mitigation, and this is your impact on the world. And this is very much a natural kind of maturity ladder on moving from understanding your impact on the world and how the world impacts you and adapting and becoming more resilient. And the way I kind of split adaptation from resilience is thinking about the reactive approach to the proactive approach. So when we adapt to things, we're thinking about minimizing harm in a more reactive way. And resilience is maybe more forward-looking. How do you think about scenarios? How do you plan for those scenarios and build a more resilient business to handle the physical and the transition risks, which are ever changing and ever being updated with the world today. If we go to the next. At the end of the day, when we talk about this, this is a financial impact on your business. And some businesses have it very short term, other businesses have it more long term, but this is something to consider as a company. And many of you have maybe explored this part when you're doing your double materiality assessment as part of CSRD or your transition plans. Understanding it as financial materiality is another way of thinking about climate risks. But many companies are still, like I was saying before, mostly focused on their impact and don't truly understand how the world is impacting your business. And at the end of the day, this is a financial risk to your company. And it's something to think about in the short term, especially if you're working in a global organization with a complex supply chain, but also in the longer term. And really, do you know unless you've kind of quantified it? And just to think about all the categories we're talking about here, we're talking about raw materials becoming more scarce. This is increasing your price of raw materials potentially. Supply chain disruptions are quite a big thing, especially in the global scene. I know we're talking about the Nordics here, but many of you are global companies. How is increased flooding in Southeast Asia impacting your supply chain? Is your company prepared and handling that increased risk over time? Climate risk also has an impact on the workforce from a health situation, increased heat waves, more diseases, etc. And of course, flooding impacts infrastructure, changing market demands, users becoming more focused on sustainable products, transitioning to those. How is that impacting your product portfolio? And then you have the investors and the insurance companies who are either divesting for non-resilient companies or increasing premiums if essentially your financial risk at the end of the day is too high in their opinion. And this isn't kind of something just long term. This is something that we actually see happening now as well. And we have our World Imbalance report. I encourage you all to kind of read this, and it gives more information than we're able to give in kind of 5 minutes here. But what we're seeing is that a lot of companies, I mean, almost over 80% of companies are having right now supply chain disruptions due to climate change. And we're having production shortages and raw material scarcity. And the question kind of to you as a business should be, do you really understand that risk today in your business? And are you prepared to have it? So is your supply chain diversified enough? Do you have the necessary energy security and infrastructure to prevent shortages? And are you prepared to handle critical raw material scarcity? Are you exploring how to recycle more on a local basis to kind of prevent the dependence on high-risk areas? And at the end of the day, this is more about securing business continuity for you. And the ROI, you can argue many things, but we definitely see that every invested dollar has an economic return. And this is essentially reducing the cost and the financial risk that we see here. So if we take like the Nordic perspective, I think, we have a lot of infrastructure, we have a lot of global companies also here, which benefit from investing in these things. But really, to really understand this, you kind of have to understand what are the risks. You have to quantify those, you have to model those, and you have to think about it in as a risk management type of way. And to do that kind of complex thing every day on an operational level, you really need to work with technology and data to do that in an efficient manner. Yeah.
So the big question is, how can you adapt and get the benefits from a resilient supply chain? And technology is obviously the game changer here to acquire and to take advantage of new data. We can take a few examples like IoT and smart metering that leads to identifying suboptimal settings and then further help you to reduce energy or water consumptions. And we know that water will be very stressed. So hence making savings possible and helping you being less dependent on the markets. There are climate data platforms like SWIP to gather internal and external data, including scientific data that can help you model scenarios for the future and hence anticipating and possibly preventing serious complications. We have product lifecycle intelligence as well, which is for companies that have large product portfolios, typically chemicals or consumer goods, or companies that have very complex products made up with a lot of components. So this enables to produce product performance metrics and comply with the digital product passports. and also that helps you and helps your R&D with eco-design. So now Julien will tell us how SWIP helps map and understand your materiality risks.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, Thomas. I think what we're speaking about today is absolutely important, crucial for any companies. And I'm so pleased to have this presentation with our partner, Capgemini, because we are fully convinced that both SWIP plus Capgemini could offer an added value, a proposal to any companies to handle with the climate risk. So Thomas raised two questions. First, do you as a company really understand the climate risk? And second question, are you prepared to handle the climate risk? And I'm fully convinced that SWIP as a ESG data management platform is a part of the solution. So SWIP, we are handling with all the data, collecting the data, tracking the data, monitoring the data, and acting thanks to the data approach. SWIP is a kind of sustainability intelligence platform, very well ranked. Here you have a picture, very well ranked by all the analysts as IDC or Verdantix. But the proposal, the offer from SWIP is to propose you to have a platform to collect the data, to disclose the data, and to act thanks to this data. And in the next slide, you could see that what is absolutely efficient is thanks to the data. Once you get the data, then you can use the data to do many tasks. The first one is to disclose, for instance, your GHG protocol, to report under different regulations as CSRD or ISSB, GRI as well, or to be compliant or to answer the CDP framework, for instance. So you are able to collect one and to use it everywhere. But how you can use this data to handle the climate risk? This is the question today. And in the next slide, you could see that to me, but I think to Capgemini as well, we are fully convinced that thanks to the data, you are able to assess the impact and the financial risk due to the climate risk. So to answer to the first question raised by Thomas, do you really understand the situation and the risk? Here you have the double materiality matrix. You know it, Thomas already mentioned it, and you know this is a part of the EU regulation, the famous CSRD. The double materiality matrix relies on first the impact materiality, and second, the financial materiality. Impact materiality is my own impact coming from my own company on the environment, and financial materiality is the opposite. What is the impact of the environment on my P&L? So both impact are very important. And thanks to the data I did mention earlier, we are able to settle down, to set up your double materiality matrix, and then you have a clear picture about what is happening on my P&L due to the climate risk and what is happening from my own behavior on the environment. First point, thanks to this, you are able to have a kind of mapping of my impact. But second point, very important, is you can use this data platform to identify key sources of risk. This is on the next slide. These key sources of risk, if you move to the next one as well, Jeremy, you can, for instance, assess the risk all along your supply chain to understand suppliers per suppliers, which are the ones at risk. What does it mean? It means that, for instance, I've got one supplier that could be impacted by flood, by dry season, by whatever the environmental and climate impact is. And thanks to the data approach, you have the capability to assess, to map the risk supplier per supplier. very important point. And then you can monitor as well the evolution, you can monitor the potential impact all along the value chain and blah, blah, blah. Very important point. Second point on the next slide, you are able to have this mapping geo per geo, business unit per business unit, plant per plant. And once again, you could be affected by the climate risk, but it will not be the same impact in this geo or in the other one, in this industry factoring plant versus another one. So you need to have the capability to assess, to map the risk geo per geo. Could seem to be difficult, but thanks to the data approach, it's feasible. And once you have this mapping of my impact materiality, financial materiality, mapping of my suppliers, mapping of my geo, then you could settle down, on the next slide, you could settle down what we can call a transition plan or a plan to mitigate the climate risk. So answering the second question raised by Thomas, are you prepared to handle the climate risk? And here you have on the next slide the core proposal of SWIP plus Capgemini, because basically what we are doing, Capgemini is providing you with all the expertise as consultancy companies, telling you exactly what could be the best market practice, sector practice to handle the climate risk, and it will be based on this, let's say, climate risk mitigation plan. It will be based on this data approach provided by his partner SWIP as a data management platform. I hope it's clear, and this is very important, and it's not something new. We already have some huge experiences together. For instance, L'Oréal, Epiroc, very well known in your area, Banque de France, or SNCF, the French railway company. Last but not least, if you move to the next slide, Jeremy, and the one after, when we are speaking about the climate risk, we are mostly speaking about the physical impact mentioned by Thomas, so the impact I could perceive on my own production. But you've got an additional risk. This is a non-compliance risk. All over the world, we have so many new regulations. In the EU area, the CSRD, but you've got ISSB as well, more and more. And you've got the CARB regulation in the US as well. At SWIP, we are working a lot within the EU, but outside the EU as well. In the UK, we've got an office in the US. So we have a very clear picture about this non-compliance risk. And we need to, as a company, you need to mitigate this risk. Because, for instance, the CSRD regulation will impose an auditability system, meaning that every data you are going to disclose has to be auditable. And this non-compliance risk is very important because this is a way as well to, let's say, convince the financial part of your company that you need to invest into the climate risk mitigation, because if not, then you're going to have an impact on your P&L due to the difficulties on your own production, but you could have also an impact on your P&L due to the fact that you are not going to be compliant with this kind of regulation. And it could seem to be difficult because we know that the regulation is sometimes a little bit complex. As a former minister, I've got a huge experience on that field. But definitely, once again, thanks to the data approach, you are able to comply and to report under the regulation quite easily. Let's just think about the fact that all the data I did mention, once we get this data, then we are able to populate all the different KPIs we mentioned on the materiality, on the financial, on the supplier, on the geo, but also at the same time, we are able to populate the different regulatory framework, ones to be used everywhere. So here you have an overall assessment about the situation and how we are able to provide you the way to really understand the impact of the climate risk and to really being prepared to handle with the climate risk.
Great. Thank you very much, Julien and Thomas. So we have about 8 minutes for questions and answers. I see that we have received the first ones. Reminder that you have this Q&A section in Zoom that you can use. So feel free to ask additional questions. If we don't have the time to answer everything, we will answer afterwards. So I see a first question. You mentioned compliance risk. So Julien, how do you prepare when regulations keep changing constantly? You're on mute, Julien.
Sorry. It's a very good question. Let's say, especially in the EU, but it could be exactly the same in the US as well, because you have seen in the US all the debate regarding the carbs regulation, the fact that there is a legal action to fight against this regulation and blah blah blah. So yes, the regulation is moving a lot, and basically, what a regulation has been able to implement, another regulation is able to move it. So yes, it could evolve a lot during the years. But having said that, for instance, speaking about the CSRD, now let's say all the foundation of the regulation have been settled down, have been fixed. So now we know, for instance, regarding the CSRD regulation, that first, the double materiality will remain. Second, that we're going to have a few, several hundreds of KPI to be populated. We know that all the KPI will have to be auditable. We know that a transition plan, even if it's not mandatory strictly, but it could be absolutely necessary, etc., etc. And the point is, I fully understand as a company, I do not have the time to follow all the different regulations, the evolution, and blah, blah, blah. But at SWIP, we are doing the follow-up for you. For instance, all the regulations, the CSRD regulation, has been directly coded into the platform, meaning that each time you've got a change, then directly into the platform, the change has been implemented in parallel. So you can be confident in the fact that if you are reporting under CSRD through the platform, then at the end of the day, you will be compliant. If everything has been done in a proper manner and with the auditors side by side, if I may. So yes, this is, a point. We have to navigate with it. We do not have any magic solution to convince every EU Parliament member to not change regulation anymore. It will not happen. This is a democratic point. So we need to navigate, but for sure, a platform could be very helpful to do so.
Great. Thank you, Julien. So the next question is about data. So what data do we actually need to assess climate risk accurately, and how do we handle gaps in our supply chain or portfolio data? Thomas?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this as the data guy here. But as Julien was talking about, a lot of the same data we talk about when we talk about climate risk is also what you are using for your CSRD reporting. It's an extensive supply chain mapping, essentially. But in my opinion, when you take it to kind of looking at the physical risks, especially, then it's actually, in my opinion, an easier exercise, because then you're talking really about location data. So as long as you can understand, where your assets are, which I hope you do as a company, but also where your suppliers are located, then you have come a long way to understand how climate change impacts those locations. That's really the key for kind of the physical risk aspect of it. In addition to that, it's about tracking regulatory changes, like Julien was saying. That's one way of following it up. And once you kind of have all of this, if you really want to be kind of sophisticated on climate risk, you should deploy some models on top of it. And these are readily available with different scenarios on your locations. So how is this Model X on this climate scenario impacting the future? And with that, you can combine it also with your current plans, whatever else is happening in the world with net scraping, etc. If you pull all of that together, probably deploying some AI on top of it, to use that buzzword, but really to understand the complexity around it, I think there is a lot to learn from getting that 360 picture around it. On the gaps, I think for your tier 1 suppliers, when you talk about that, you most likely will have your location data, but the transportation issue is still an issue here, right? So if anyone here has done transportation calculations for scope 3, it's a difficult challenge because you don't have the route information always, but there are ways to calculate this, whether it's through platforms or other, like EcoInvent, for example, but there are ways to estimate different routes for your supply chain network. And of course, tier 2 is more challenging, but maybe Julian can comment a bit on this. But this is, again, a bit lower risk because it's the next level. Understanding the country of your tier 2 suppliers is at least a starting point for it.
Fully aligned with what you have said, Thomas. And for sure, we are able to estimate many things using some database. So Thomas did mention EcoInvent. In the Sweep data platform, we have many database as EcoInvent is, and we can use it to make some estimation. But very important, when we are doing an estimation, so based on estimate data, then we are doing it in a very granular way, meaning that we are able to make some extrapolation, but extrapolation per geo, per sector, and not a roughly extrapolation which doesn't make sense. So first, yeah, we are able to estimate, but at Sweep, thanks to AI and thanks to all the added value we've got, we've got a capability to make extrapolation in a very concrete way. Second point, to answer the question on the tier 2, what is absolutely necessary? It's first to identify the source of the risk, meaning the let's say the 20% of the most emissive supplier or most risky suppliers. And then for them, you're going to have a granular approach, relying on very concrete data you need to get or you need to use. And we have many examples of automative way, semi-automative way, or manual way to get this info because you need it. Having said that, now at Sweep, we've got many materials, many datas. We are using a lot of other source of datas. Everything has been collected into the platform. So we are able to get some info about your own suppliers and to compare, to make some benchmarking. And then we are able to go not only for the tier 1, but for the tier 2 suppliers as well. And at the end of the day, the purpose is to map the risk all along your value chain and to identify precisely where the risks are located. And this, once again, thanks to data and AI, because for a while we did invest a lot in AI, we've got the capability to do things in a good way once again. And finally, I think what is very relevant is to have this kind of combo between a platform, sustainability intelligence platform, and consultancy firm as Capgemini, because we can cross the tools and the expertise as well at the same time.
Thank you very much. We have more questions, but we are running out of time. So we had questions, for instance, on how to assess financial impacts. I see that, Thomas, you have replied to that one already. Yeah. Other questions on tips and guidance to get started with the climate risks. We will answer that later on. We'll send some information. For now, it's time to close, and we thank you very, very much for your participation to this webinar. Now you know who we are. If you have additional questions that have not been raised, feel free to reach out to us. Have a very good day.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye.